this work is not about something else for us to put on our list of things to do. This work is about how we do what we do, how we do everything we do.
How is it going, ladies and gentlemen? This is Sean Barnes. I want to welcome you back to the Way of the Wolf. We have a very special guest on the show today. Her name is Julie Williamson. She is the CEO of the Karrikin Group out of Denver, Colorado. We are going to dive in and talk about leadership and culture and teams and transformations and all sorts of really cool stuff. Julie, welcome to the Way of the Wolf.
Thanks, Sean. I'm so delighted to be here.
Okay, so first and foremost, what on earth is a Karrikin?
Yeah, we get that question a lot. And a Karrikin actually is something real. It's not a person. Sometimes I get asked, who's Mr. Karrikin? I never actually get asked who's Mrs. Karrikin, which is interesting enough. But it's not a person. A Karrikin is an element that, or not an element, but a chemical reaction that happens after a wildfire, where the smoke from the wildfire helps to germinate the soil and helps to spark new growth. And one of the things that we love to do at Karrikin's Group is to focus on growth, especially after times of transformation. It doesn't always have to be wildfire level transformation, by the way. It can be really like positive and generative transformation. But that idea that there can be a catalyst that really helps to spark that transformation and growth is what we lean into at Karrikin's Group. And so it felt like a really fitting name for us. It also, just by the way, I'll just tell you this really quickly, shouts back to our Australian heritage, because Karrik was one of the first Aboriginal words that was translated into English, and it means smoke.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. That's incredible. So how long have you been with the Karrikin Group?
It's got to be coming on 7 or 8 years now. Yeah.
Okay. So talk me through your experience and as you joined the Karrikin Group and then you progressed into the CEO role. Is that correct?
I did, yeah. And it actually was just an interesting, as you know, I like to call myself an accidental owner, right? We just kind of came into this. But in 2020, after I'd been with the company for probably about 4 years, the gentleman who had founded it and really grown it into the organization that it is today, he decided to exit the business, and he approached my business partner and I about taking over ownership of the company. And I will tell you, Sean, that's not something that I ever saw for myself. You know, I never dreamed of owning my own company or of being in a partnership the way that I am today. And it's been a really wonderful journey over the last few years. Lots of learnings and lots of growth for me, lots of transformation for me as an individual and as a leader. And I've really appreciated it. But I would just say to anybody out there in your audience that is maybe on that journey themselves, I would just say stay open and stay curious and interested in what's possible for yourself and your organization, and good things come from that.
You know, what's interesting, as you were talking through that, I think there's a lot of people that don't necessarily have aspirations to own or run a company, but they want to do well in life and achieve success, whatever success looks like. And then at some point in life, they almost stumble or find themselves in more and more of a leadership role, or even just get to a point where they're like, oh my gosh, I have to leave corporate America to go start my own thing that I'm really passionate about. And so even if that's not the end goal, my takeaway is that we have to make sure that we are focused on building skills, developing skills, and becoming the best version of ourselves to be better prepared for whatever the future ends up holding for us.
Yeah, I think that's so astute, Sean. This idea that if you're just open to what's possible for yourself and for others, then suddenly the kind of impact that you're able to have can change, and it can grow exponentially.
It really can.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's see here. Talk me through your progression. Whenever you started, what was the role that you started in whenever you ended up at the Karrikin Group?
Yeah, you want like go into the Wayback Machine?
Yeah, let's go way back. Not all the way, but let's go back a bit.
Yeah, I started my career with a very large systems integrator, and I had the great fortune to travel the world, live in lots of interesting places, and do some really great work in technology in the 90s, which was the beginning of really the mobile phone industry. From a global perspective. Obviously, there were mobile phones in the 70s and 80s, but the 90s is when it really took off. And I had the opportunity to be on the ground floor of that quite a bit. So it gave me this great exposure to technology and also to communication in the sense of suddenly now we were able to communicate and connect in ways that we never had before because we now had these devices, right? These mobile phone devices, which now we can't live without. But that gave me a real appreciation for the role of technology in business and what that intersection looked like. And then I spent the early 2000s doing more strategy work, thinking about how strategically do companies leverage technology, some work in finance, things like that, kind of typical consulting career, jumping around a bit. And then I realized I had this like epiphany where I realized I knew a lot about technology, I knew a lot about strategy, I knew a lot about business, and yet the clients that I was working with, they still weren't getting where they needed to be organizationally in terms of really seeing their strategies come to life, seeing their transformations be successful. Like they were putting lots of time and money and energy into it. And so this is, Sean, where it gets like super like interesting. This is about me, but I thought to myself, what I really need to do is go back to school. And I don't know that everybody comes to that conclusion, but I went back and got my PhD in a social science. So I had an MBA, I had a background in information systems, but I felt like I just didn't understand how people were working. So I go back to school, I get my PhD in organizational communication. And it really, for me, it filled in so many gaps in my understanding of business. It was such a valuable experience for me to now be able to look at business problems through the lens of human behavior and say, how are we connecting and communicating and engaging together so that we do this hard work together as a team? And I think at the heart of many failed transformations is the leaders all agree we need to do this, and then they go off and they do it on their own. And I think
Okay.
that's, for me, is the crux of the problem that we stand in Karrikin's group. We say we stand at the intersection of business and social science. And I think that's really what we try to bring together in the work we do.
There is such an incredible amount of power in individuals that come from that technology systems integrator background because of their ability to view data, information, recognize patterns, and correlate and pull things together, but then also step into the human psychology side of things. Now, you and I haven't had an opportunity to chat a whole lot. My background, the majority of my career was in IT. I've always been that introverted IT nerd focused on data centers, WAN architecture, all of that stuff, and then integrations. And about 8 years ago, I had the opportunity to start leading a human resources team.
Mm.
And at first, my head was just spinning, going from data, logic, numbers, facts to all emotion. But over time, I started to understand what drives and motivates and inspires people, and
Mm.
trying to take all of the lessons and things that I had learned in my career around technology and systems and integration, and then learn all these things about humans and how they operate, and then start blending those things together. And when you can look at it through both lenses, it is a beautiful thing, and you're able to accomplish just massive, massive feats and pull teams together. Because I've also seen HR executives, for example, that are extremely bubbly and outgoing and extroverted and great people. Where some of them seem to struggle is their lack of understanding around systems and processes and integration and things like that. And so when you are able to have experience in both arenas, it's extremely powerful and you can achieve incredible things.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Sean. I think you're right. Those that intersection, it's such a I love working from that space. And we like to say that in an ever more digital world, leadership is becoming ever more human. And you need to really be able to understand and work with that digitization and the technology. And you need to be able to tap into that human dimension of leadership. And when you bring those things together, you can achieve amazing things.
So let me ask you this. In your experience, why do you think more people don't try to get exposure in both arenas?
I think it's part of it is standing where you're comfortable and confident. Like think about your career in IT. I mean, I love technology. I like the big joke with me was I'm an early adopter, right? Like I'm the first person to come out with the new gadgets, the new toys. My friends always tease me about that, but that doesn't mean that I can't be also tapping into and understanding how people need to connect together, not just with their technology or through their technology, but what's that human interaction look like and what's the power that comes from that human interaction. But technology is much more, I'm going to use the word predictable, although we've had some wonderful unpredictable surprises over the last 10 or 15 years in tech, right? Like that's awesome. But we know it, we understand it, we have more of a sense of control. When you get into the people element of it, people are individuals, they're unique, they don't follow models, they don't necessarily conform to what the standards say they should do or not do. And so it becomes the level of variability goes up significantly. And when you're in an organizational leadership role, often your job is to reduce variability and to reduce the number of things that might possibly take you by surprise or go wrong. So introducing more people into an equation doesn't necessarily make sense. If you're just looking at it from the perspective of how do I operationalize this and get it done as quickly as possible.
I had never even thought about using that terminology around when you start introducing people, you are introducing an seemingly infinite amount of variability that becomes increasingly complex and challenging to wrap your head around. And to kind of talk through your point, when you were working with servers and switches and firewalls, you set the configuration
Yep.
and it's done. It
Yep.
just works, right? With humans, not so much, because the configuration for Jason, whenever he's in his early 20s, he's hungry, he wants a bunch of money, he wants to progress through his career. But when Jason turns 30 and gets married and has kids, his priorities might shift and change a little bit. Maybe he wants a little bit more time off. Maybe he's not quite so hungry. He's kind of met all of his basic financial needs and he's happy and content. And so, as leaders, we have to be aware of that dynamic with each person on our team. And we have to understand what drives and motivates Jason in his early 20s might not drive and motivate him whenever he's 30 and has a wife and kids. And so that speaks to that variability that you were just talking about. Whenever we start looking into the human aspect, and leading teams is all about becoming a force multiplier. In order to do that, you have to understand what motivates and drives every single person on the team.
Yeah. And your switches and your networks, you get them configured correctly and they're going to work for a long time. And if they're not working correctly, there's a reason for it, right? Like you can figure it out and you can fix that. With Jason here, it might just be that, this morning he got up, he had a great workout, he had a good breakfast, everything was calm in the house, and he walked into work and he was ready to go. And tomorrow, you know, kids got up early and his morning routine got disrupted and he's walking in and he's dragging. It's totally different, right? So the level of variability and the reasons for it are significantly different than when you're working with widgets. But I think, we like to say, look, there's an old expression. Do you know the expression, to go fast, go alone, to go far, go together? Have you ever heard that? To go fast, go alone, to go far, go together. We like to say, to go far fast, get aligned. To go far fast as a group, you need to be aligned to your shared goals. And so I think that if you can lean into, in your leadership role, your responsibility, your obligation, what you can be energized by is helping people to get aligned to those shared goals so that they can go far fast.
Do you see many of y'all's customers that struggle with setting a vision and goals that the organization can get behind?
Yeah, we see organizations spend an inordinate amount of money and time on what they're going to do, their strategies. And strategies are important. I'm a strategist at heart. I love a good strategy. But the amount of time and effort and money that's spent there to get super clear about what you're doing, it doesn't pay dividends if you don't take the time to get people connected to that strategy so that they can meaningfully act on it at the end of the day. Same thing with the mission, vision, values, right? I think why you do what you do, why you're in business is important. You get no argument with me about your why and your what, your mission, vision, values, your strategy. Yes, you should have them, but they're almost table stakes in today's world. Like you should have them done. For us, the missing piece for a lot of organizations, and this, by the way, is organizations large and small. So if you're a startup, if you're kind of that mid-sized company, if you're a big organization, knowing how to lead together is the missing piece. People have not put the time and energy and resources into figuring out how to lead together so that they can deliver on their what and their why. And I think that, for me, is part of the reason that I think sometimes people stumble on their most ambitious strategies or transformations. They're like, yeah, that's what we need to do, but they haven't figured out how to do it together. And that's a real challenge.
It really is. And I think that part of the reason this is such a very real challenge for business leaders and executives and business owners is that there is and always has been such an emphasis put on developing and building hard skills, and soft skills are seemingly labeled as touchy-feely HR stuff. And the reality is soft skills are like superpowers these days, because hard skills are becoming increasingly commoditized, especially with generative AI and everything that's going on in that space now. So these soft skills are what people have to lean into to figure out how to best lead their teams, how to create alignment, not only for just the strategy, but then pulling people along with it. And if you have a vision and mission and purpose that people can get behind, that vision will pull people along. However, we have to lean into and start developing those soft skills around what it means to be empathetic and compassionate and lead with kindness and candor, because those are the things that people can get behind. And it's not until you have had the opportunity to actually build, develop, and implement those skills to see the incredible increase in output and productivity before you can actually see the value behind it. Because most leaders, they just think, oh, well, that's HR touchy-feely stuff, and we just need to execute. We just need to get the job done. Well, this is the way to extract the most out of people. And until you've seen it firsthand and seen how powerful it can be, it's challenging for business leaders to get behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it also has a bit of a slow burn, right? We talk, and I know we talk about this idea of a successful simmer. How do you do things well over time rather than how do I just fix this problem and move on to the next problem? And that's not really how people work, right? So how, as a leader, do you show up in that space? It goes back to what I said earlier. In an ever more digital world, leadership is becoming ever more human. And so if you want to be a strong leader it's been true in the past, but going forward especially, how do you show up as a human in that space and recognize that leading humans is different from fixing technical problems? What does that look like? I think for those middle managers, like especially, one of the things that we've noticed in a career progression is that leaders get to that middle level because they're really good at their technical discipline. So whether it's technology or finance or HR or marketing or whatever it is, they have a technical discipline that they excel at. And so they become a team leader or they become a manager or they kind of grow in that space. If you want to take that step up into enterprise level leadership, if you want to really make that move to where you have bigger influence and broader remits in the organization, then you have to learn how to not just lead your team from a technical perspective, but how do you engage with your peers across the organization as a leadership team? What does that horizontal leadership look like? We talk about T-shaped leadership. That intersection, that step up from being a really great vertical leader to being engaged with a leadership team of peers who need to work together to deliver on the strategy of the company. That's where really the magic happens in terms of leadership and being able to align to shared goals.
And I think it is important to have proficiency in a domain that you are leading in. However, it is also important to build skills around leading people. Now, one of the things that I've been very fortunate in my career to lead IT and HR and safety and transportation and ESG over the years. And while I started building a depth of knowledge in each of those domains, there was this umbrella across the top that encompassed leading people, but also understanding areas of the business that were not part of my responsibility. I had to understand, what are the challenges that they are experiencing out in the Permian? What are the challenges they are experiencing in an entirely different business unit in a different part of the country? So that doesn't mean you have to understand it to the same level that you do everything that you are leading, but being able to take a step back and think, okay, while I'm leading these teams and I know about this stuff, I also have to educate myself and better understand these other areas of the business, because there are interdependencies and connections between all of them. And so for us to successfully lead and coach and build and mentor the people on our team, part of that process is helping them understand why they're struggling with this out in Pennsylvania. Why are they struggling with this out in New Mexico? This is what's going on. So the ability to learn and adapt are just crucial skills. And so my question to you is, do you see many leaders that find themselves in a role like that, but they stumble, they fall, because of their unwillingness to step out of their comfort zone and learn other areas?
Absolutely. And I think part of it is, you tapped into it, the level of understanding that's necessary. We talk about the need to appreciate the impact, not understand the discipline. And so if you're taking that step up into enterprise leadership, how do you appreciate the impact of decisions on other parts of the organization? Well, that means you need to know enough to appreciate that impact. It doesn't mean you have to become an expert in finance or an expert in what's happening in the plant in Pennsylvania, but you need the business acumen to appreciate the impact that decisions have. And where I see, again, at that hinge point where people are moving from managing their discipline to leading from an enterprise perspective, is they come in with more of that defender mentality or warrior mentality. Like, I have to defend my team from any negative impact. That's my job, right? Like, my best service is to defend my team. And so they come in with that kind of orientation instead of being curious about, why are we making these decisions? Why are we heading in this direction? What is the strategy about from an enterprise perspective? They get very locked into, what does this mean for my team and how do I protect my team?
When you can appreciate the impact, it makes it easier to manage the change. So let's talk about transformation and these initiatives around whether it's transformation or integration, specifically around mergers and acquisitions and things like that. Oh man, so many acquisitions and integrations end up failing or achieving suboptimal results throughout the integration or transformation time frame. And you and I talked about this a little bit before we hit record. I love your perspective on it. So can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of these things where we see leaders, they know exactly what they're doing. We're going to acquire this organization and here's why, or we're going to head in this strategic direction and here's why. They know why they're doing it. Improved customer service, better market spread, whatever it might be. So they know their what and their why, but they haven't figured out how to do it together as leaders. And so here's the fun thing, Sean, that happens. Leaders love to change other people. but they don't love to change themselves, right? So they get on board with their sponsor role. You know about the sponsor role in transformation, right? Or in M&A or whatever it might be. You're going to like push send on the email that somebody else writes for you. You're going to hit all the bullet points in your town hall, right? Like you're going to, and people are like, I'm a great sponsor of change. And my first question to them is, how are you changing yourself and your leadership to learn to lead differently in a transformed organization? Because if you don't have to change how you lead, you are not transforming your organization. That's a very hard message for leaders. I'm going to say it again. If you don't have to change how you lead, you are not transforming your organization. And when you see leaders start to absorb that, that's when they figure out how, okay, so what do I do? Like, how do I lead differently? And if it's okay, Sean, I'm just going to share my screen real quick and show you just a little model that we use that might be fun for your listeners. Let me pull this up real quick. So we talk about the difference between, can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So we talk about the difference between change enablement or change management and leader activation, and the difference between telling other people how they need to do things differently and thinking about how we need to lead differently as leaders in the organization. And we often see leaders go through the flop. I'm sure, Sean, you have experienced the flop. Is that
I
fair to
have
say?
experienced the flop. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know about you, but I've been on both sides of the flop, where I've been the leader who's like, yes, this is going to be awesome, and then everybody else needs to go change, and I'm going to get back to my day job. And I've been on the receiving end of that, where leaders have, kind of come in strong, and then we're just like, okay, well, then they disappeared, and now we don't even know where they are anymore. So I think, just full accountability for myself there around it. What we like to see leaders do is this successful simmer. So the successful simmer is where leader energy stays high during times of transformation. It doesn't have to be redlined all the time. Like, you don't have to stay at that launch level of engagement and energy, because that's just not possible. Like, you can't sustain that forever. But if you can get to that successful simmer, then as a leadership team or as leaders, you're starting to learn new ways of leading while your organization is going on the change curve, right? And so we talk about the difference between leaders doing things like building fluency in the new business language, changing questions around how they're evaluating the success of the business, really modeling the way for others, versus change management or change enablement, which is about messaging, communication, training, all really important, especially for the people who have their hands on the keyboard. But it's different. It's a different discipline than activating leaders around transformation or change. So just a way to think about it. And I'm curious, Sean, as you reflect on your experiences, how that lands.
It resonates with me beyond belief, because I have seen the leaders that come in. We close this deal. All right, hoorah. You do the big town hall. Everybody comes in. We're going to give you all the support we need. And then you never hear from them again. Yeah. Until something starts going wrong and they start dropping a hammer on middle management. Why isn't this getting done? Why isn't this getting done? But there's rarely that level of, we'll say, accountability at the senior leadership level for those sorts of challenges. That they're very good at pushing that accountability down, but they don't always turn the mirror and reflect on themselves and consider, what am I doing or not doing to be able to support this initiative? What am I not doing to ensure that this mission, goal, or objective is not getting across the finish line? And you see this again, they front load all this energy, and then it starts to taper and wane. Everybody goes back to business as usual. And then one of the graphics that you showed there is kind of like this whiplash of back and forth, which usually occurs when something significant goes wrong or breaks. They inject themselves back in, drop a hammer, yell, or whatever their leadership style is. And then once things get on back on track, they go back to business as usual, as opposed to that second graphic that you showed of it being kind of more of a flow and steady state and wave of involvement. And as leaders, we have to get comfortable of staying detached enough to make sure that we're looking up and out and leading the direction of the organization, but also staying plugged in enough that we can quickly assess, hey, are things going in the wrong direction? Let's dive in now. Let's roll up our sleeves and work through this together, not just barking orders and you guys have to fix this. All circling back to your point that you had mentioned about the importance of leaders finding that balance and stepping in when needed and then stepping back when also necessary.
Yeah, and I would go even further with the obligation of leaders, which is stepping in when needed if things aren't happening the way they need to happen, but also taking ownership of their own change and their own transformation. How are they becoming fluent in a new language of business if you're implementing a major new system? How are they learning a new way of doing business if you're doing a massive acquisition, right? What does that look like? How do they make that visible, and how do they go on that their own journey? I'll give you just a quick example. We've done a lot of work. I've done a lot of work over my 30-year career now around sales compensation models, right? Have you ever, Sean, tried to mess with a sales compensation model?
Oh, yes, very much. So leading HR
like
and
rail.
having sales organizations, it is a very real
Yeah,
challenge.
I felt like this might sound familiar. Here's what often happens is a new compensation system is brought in. So there's an IT component. There's change management for the sales force around understanding the new model and understanding what success will look like for them financially within that. Leaders often stay stuck in the language of the old system and the old model. So they continue to use terms, they continue to use ratios, they continue to use, they assume that they know how commissions or whatever are going to get calculated because they're familiar with the old system. And so then they're holding their sales managers or leaders accountable to the old system while everybody's doing all of this hard work to get onto the new system. And then the leaders are like, well, people aren't doing what they need to do. People are doing what they need to do to keep the leaders happy in the old system. And so then you end up with this huge waste of energy and this huge, gap between what the language that the leaders are using and the language of the new system. That's just an easy example of where leader activation fails and everybody else is doing the hard work of change management. And you just see this huge disconnect. So they know what they're doing, they know why they're doing it. The change management program is running, the systems integrators implementing the new system, everything's clicking, and the missing piece is leader activation. They haven't figured out how to lead together in the new system.
And, this is a challenging topic for a lot of businesses to contend with. And where I'm going to go is these leaders that they know that change needs to occur. They push change down into the organization, but rarely ever take the time to change themselves in the process and be aware of it. And I think that a large part of this is attributed to ego. I suspect that in and of itself creates massive, massive issues in organizations because those senior leaders push that change. And to your point, well, I understand you guys do this stuff. I know what's going on, but they're not willing to take that time. So the big question is, how do you break that ego?
Yeah, what a great question, Sean. I think this idea, ego shows up in a lot of different ways. And let's pull it out of business for just a minute. Yeah. Do you know anyone, and it might be you, who's ever paid for a gym membership and then never gone to the gym?
For sure.
Happens all the time, right?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. There's crazy numbers. There's none reliable, but somewhere in the range of 60 to 80% of people who pay for gym memberships very rarely go to the gym, right? But they have this idea that because they're willing to pay for it, they're supportive of it, right? I pay for it. So I do believe in going to the gym and being physically fit. I'm just not actually doing it. Right? I think we see the same thing. Like people are saying, well, I'm paying for all my people to go to training. I'm paying the systems. I said yes to the $7 million budget, right? Like, isn't that enough? Isn't it enough that I'm paying for it and I'm agreeing to it and I'm doing all the checklist things that you're telling me to do? Again, I go back to that sponsor role. People are like, I know I can be successful at the sponsor role. Like I can approve the budget. I can hit the talking points in my town halls. I can push send on the emails. It's very tactical and they know how to do it and they know they can be successful. So they stay there. This idea of I have to learn a new language, I have to change how I lead, when how I lead has been very good for me, by the way, thank you very much. That really gets to that idea of identity, right? Who am I as a leader? Like, I'm not sure that I can lead in that transformed environment. So I think you start to see this uncertainty bubble up. And it's a little bit ego. I think it's also sort of this like human condition that we want to do well and we want to be able to take care of our people. So I do think it genuinely sometimes comes from a desire to take care of and to nurture the people in their organizations. So I think that comes in as well, like how, again, that defender persona, like how do I defend my not just my power, but how do I defend the people who depend on me in this environment? I think you see some of that come in. So the ego, I think, takes a lot of different dimensions. It's not just like chest pounding pride, right? Like I have to defend my pride. It is about all of these nuanced things that happen. And then also the last thing I'll say, Sean, is quite frankly, many of these leaders, we work with some of the biggest companies in the world. They have enormous jobs. They have jobs that go well beyond, the normal capacity of any individual human being. And so they have to do their jobs and they have to activate their own transformation. And that's a big ask.
It is. While you were talking through that, I was making so many notes. I'm going to try to unpack all of this stuff for us to talk through. Okay. So you mentioned something about leaders investing in leadership development and building their people and openly talking about how important it is to build and develop people, create those upward mobility opportunities. That doesn't mean that they are also investing in themselves and continuing to build their own skills as a leader. You can say it publicly, you can shout it from the mountaintops, but if you are not investing in yourself because you think, well, I've made it to the CEO chair, I don't need any development, that's a recipe for disaster. On a long enough time horizon, things are going to break down. And if you are part of a growing organization, the leader that you were at 400 employees is going to need to be different from the leader at 3,000 employees. And if you think you're still going to operate with that same mindset and skill set that you did at 400 or 500 employees and be successful with 3,000 employees or more, it's not going to work out. It's just simply things are going to start to break down, and you might not see it immediately, but over time you will start to see the effects. Now, if the CEO or senior leader can or can't see those effects, that's a different story. They might allocate or push the blame down to other people, but this goes back to the conversation. You've got to look in the mirror.
That's right. And we see that so often with mergers and acquisitions. We see it with transformation work, this idea that everybody can be working really hard to execute on the systems integration piece, on the change management piece, but what's holding the organization back is at the senior leadership level, that they're not going on their own. They're not actively and energetically activating their own change so that they can successfully lead the transformation. And that's a very hard message for leaders sometimes to hear.
It really is. And another argument that I hear is, I don't have time. Okay, fair. If you're a leader of a large organization, time is going to be a constraint for you. But also, if you are a leader of a large organization, that is your role, to make time. And so what that means is we have to figure out ways to identify and implement efficiencies in everything that we do. We also need to spend time building those beneath us, because the stronger your COO is, the stronger your chief revenue officer is, the less you are going to have to spend working on those issues and solving those issues. So whenever you invest in building all of your leaders, all of your directors, all of your managers, all ships start to rise with the tide.
Yeah.
As the most senior leader, that should be your role and responsibility, to make time and to build the people on your team.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to that idea we were talking about before around how we lead together. So not just the what and the why, but getting really clear at that enterprise level. How do we as a leadership team lead together? And what does that look like? And what are the success metrics that we're holding ourselves to as senior leaders? If you can answer that question, your ability to transform your organization and to deliver on incredibly ambitious strategic goals goes through the roof. If you don't have an answer to that question, how do we lead together? Then you will continue to slog along. Like you'll trudge forward. You're going to get there, but it's going to be harder. It's going to take longer, and you're going to go through the whiplash cycle more often.
Oh my
And it
God. I
won't be
have a
as fun.
feeling that you and I could just talk for hours on all of these topics, but I do want to make sure that we cover, talk me through, it would seem evident that at the Karrikins group, you guys are very passionate and focused on building leaders and developing high performing teams. Are there any other areas that you guys focus on that you are especially passionate about?
We do some work in the what and the why, because what happens is we come in to help leadership teams figure out how to lead together. And often what happens is they realize that their what and their why are not as strong as they thought they were. So it can be sort of an outcome of the work that we do, is that there's a realization to kind of tighten up a little bit around that, if that makes sense. At the heart of all of our work is understanding this idea of the space between agreement and alignment. So it's really easy to agree we should do something, really easy to agree I should go to the gym, all the way up to it's really easy to agree that we should acquire this company and expand our market by 3x. Really easy to agree we should change the sales comp program, whatever it might be. Aligning to it as leaders, whether it's a strategic initiative or an acquisition or whatever it might be, that takes hard work from the leaders who often like to let other people change but don't like to change themselves. And so from a Karrikins group perspective, whether it's in the what or the why or how we lead together, it's helping people get through that agreement to alignment gap. We call it the failure gap between agreement and alignment, right? So if you fall in the failure gap, which people do all the time, I do it in my personal life, my professional life, we all do it. But how can you be more aware of it and be more intentional about moving from agreement to alignment as a leadership team so that you can effectively lead your organization through times of transformation and change?
Tell me, what is one of the biggest lessons that you have learned in your time at the Karrikins group?
Hmm. That's such a great question. There have been so many. Finding the the biggest one. I think one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is that this isn't just. We had a client who was doing some work with us, and he said to me in one of our sessions, "Julie, I just figured it out. This work is not about something else for us to put on our list of things to do. This work is about how we do what we do, how we do everything we do." Because he was thinking that, we're just going to come up with another list of values or whatever, and like it's going to be a poster on the wall, and then we have to remember to do that every now and then. And when he had that moment where he realized this is not about making a list of things to do, this is about how we should be doing what we do, that was a big lesson for me, that we have to do better. We have to constantly be in pursuit of better about how we help people embody the work as humans. How do they bring it forward? Because it shouldn't be a poster on the wall. It should be about This is how we make every decision together as a leadership team. This is how we decide who's going to be on stage at the town hall. This is how we decide, are we going to invest $1 million in that system? This is the lens through which we put everything that we do. And I'll never forget him. His name was Alan. He's a great guy. And it was a real lesson for me about making sure that we help people understand that piece of it, right?
Such a crucial thing for leaders and organizations to focus on. Thank you.
Yeah.
So what is the best way for people to contact you and find more about the Karrikins Group?
Yeah, we would love to have people check us out at karrikinsgroup.com and leave a note, say hello at karrikinsgroup.com over email. I'm out on LinkedIn as well. You can check out my LinkedIn profile. We have a Karrikins Group LinkedIn too, and we have a YouTube channel too that's coming up. So there's a bunch of stuff that's going to be dropping out there in the next couple of months. So looking forward to it.
That's fantastic. I love hearing that you guys are launching a YouTube channel. I mean, we've had this channel for a little over 3 years now, and it's such an incredible opportunity to share wisdom and knowledge and just get it out there to positively impact people's lives. So I love hearing that you guys are doing that.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is all we have for the show today. Thank you so much, and y'all have a good one.